Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. I'm Duran with DuranSupply.com, where I'll help you design smarter, not harder. Vintage band tees will never go out of style. Let's create one of our own for Aerosmith using VINTONE, the widely acclaimed Photoshop template for making vintage t-shirt graphics. If you don't have VINTONE, I highly recommend you pick that up on my store. I've personally used it on official graphics for Metallica, Stevie Nicks, and Olivia Rodrigo, so it clearly gets the job done. And you're going to learn a lot more about it in the next couple minutes here. Anyway, let's get started. So we're going to be designing a vintage looking t-shirt for Aerosmith. I have a few references here that I'm going to stick pretty closely to. So here's just a few of them that I really liked and that I'm going to pull from to make my actual design here. So let's head into VINTONE, which I have open in Photoshop right now. So VINTONE is just a PSD file that you can open up and start designing your t-shirt in. Once you hide this layer up here, you have the VINTONE group with all of the parameters that you can change. First thing you're going to want to start with is your artwork down here and the composite of your artwork. So in this composite group is where you throw in anything that you're compositing for your design, and absolutely everything that you throw in this template is going to be half-toned in real time. So no matter what changes you make to your composite or your image, it's going to be half-toned all throughout it. And it doesn't even have to be half-toned, it could be a Xerox grain look or a bitmap look just by changing the dither pattern in the smart object here. So here's what a Xerox grain look would look like. And this is actually what we're going to be using for our design. So just to get this effect took only a couple seconds, but it's also extremely useful for way more advanced stuff. And I use this template for all of the above really. Anyway, you might notice that the template is turning everything black and white, which is by design. We're going to be coloring in everything later. So for right now, let's just stick to the compositing. Like I said, you're going to do all your compositing in this composite group, and anything you throw in here is automatically going to be dithered by the pattern of your choice, whether it be halftones, Xerox grain, or a pattern. There's quite a few to choose from in this dither pattern smart object, which if you're confused about that part, all you do is double click on the smart object thumbnail here, and then from here you can just change the dither pattern to whatever you want by clicking on and off the different patterns. And once you choose the pattern of your choice, you're just going to want to Command S to save that into the actual VINTONE document. So I've got my image of the band here, and this is what we're going to be starting with. The first thing I'm going to do is scale this down just a little bit so it all fits within the bounds of the document. And the next thing I want to do is select out all of our band members to remove them from the background. Luckily, Photoshop has got that pretty nice select subject function within the select or magic wand tool. It's up here in select subject, so I'm just going to click on that, and that does a pretty nice job for us. So I'm just going to make a layer mask out of this by clicking the layer mask icon down here. And now it's time to workshop this photo a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is kind of even out the levels of the band members. If I can make them a bit more evenly spaced, I think that would benefit the composition a ton. So what I'm going to do is actually turn off all the processing on this composite, and we can do that pretty simply just by turning off the processing layer here. And I'm also going to turn off the texture so that we have a pretty clear view of what's going on. So at this point, I just want to clean up the selection a bit and then see if I can move some of the band members around to make more of an even composition. Since this is currently a smart object, I can't apply the layer mask. So what I'll do is just duplicate this. I'll hide the original version, and then I'll rasterize this layer. And now we can apply this layer mask, and from here I can start messing with the photo a bit more. So I want to move this guy a little bit up because his height is currently not on par with this fellow over here on the left, as we can see by this guide. So I'm just going to make a really rough selection around him using the polygonal lasso tool. And I don't really care too much about getting the selection super accurate because, again, we're going to be Xerox graining or halftoning or whatever. We're going to be doing some processing on this image, and you're not going to be able to see the fine details of the selection anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So here's my really rough selection. Now I'm just going to right click and go to layer via cut, and I will put this guy on a new layer. Now we are free to move him wherever we want. So we're very clearly cutting off his leg here, but once I turn this processing back on, you're not really going to be able to see much of the detail here. I'm going to intentionally obscure the part here where his leg is cut off so that, you know, you don't have a amputee in the design. So just so I can see everything better, I'm going to really quickly put a levels adjustment on top of all this and just bring the midtones all the way up. So I'm just going to move him around until I find a nice place for him that I feel is even with the rest of the band members, and then we'll start working more on the composite. Right about here looks good to me. I'm going to turn this levels off now, or actually delete it because I don't need that anymore. Now I'll merge these two layers to get them whole again, and we're going to start doing some adjustments to this image so that we can actually see it better and see the actual bodies of the band members. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this using Command J, and then I'm going to go up to Image, Adjustments, Shadows, and Highlights. And I'm going to turn the highlights all the way down because the highlights look pretty fine to me. The only thing we want to mess with is the shadows because they're wearing pretty dark clothes, and those are getting very obscured by the processing we have on. So we just want to crank up these shadows a ton. and that's going to start bringing back the detail in on their clothes. You can obviously mess with the other parameters to try and get more of an interesting effect. Once you're satisfied, just press OK on this and we're good to go. Now I'm going to put all of these layers into a group, so I'm going to select all of them and Command G. And now if there's any more adjustments I want to do, I can just clip it to this group in case we need to change any of these layers individually. So for example, if I want to throw another levels adjustment on this, I'm going to bring it above the group and then clip it to that group. And now say if I want more of a tighter spread on these values, I'll bring in the blacks a little bit and I'll bring in the whites, and that's going to give us a bit more contrast on this image, and that looks pretty good to me. Now there are some spots I want to darken as well, so I'm going to make another levels adjustment and clip that to the group, and then I'll just bring the midtones down a bit to darken the image as a whole. And I'll turn the layer mask on this levels black by doing Command I on my keyboard, and I'll just take a soft brush with my primary color as white, and then I can paint in on this layer mask wherever I want those dark spots to be. So a little bit on his shirt here I think is a little too bright. On some of these faces for sure they're a little too bright. Maybe even the guitar over here is a little too bright. I'm gonna bring back some detail there and into his hands. Steven Tyler looking sexy as always. Okay, perfect. That looks good to me. Now that I got all these adjustments done, I'm gonna make another group to put all this in to isolate the photo from the rest of the composite. So I'm gonna select all these and then make a group with Command G, and I'll just name this photo. Next up, I want to throw the Aerosmith logo in here. So I'm just going to grab that from my files, which I saved for this video. I want to use this logo right here because that type is so sick. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I'm also a little bit sick. Anyway, we can't see this logo because it's black. So I'm going to invert it with Command I, and then I just want to rasterize this because I don't like dealing with smart objects. I know there's a lot of smart objects fanatics out there. I'm not one of them. Every time I get the chance to rasterize one, I will. So we're going to go up to rasterize layer, and this needs a bit of workshopping in size and style. So first thing I'm going to do is bring the size down a bit, somewhere around here maybe, and I'll bring that above the heads of our band here. Now this would be way cooler if we had the band in front of the logo. So what we're going to do is take a selection of our band members here by holding down Command on our keyboard and pressing the layer thumbnail of our band photo. Then we'll go up here to the logo, put it in a group with Command G, and make a layer mask from the selection using the layer mask icon. And then we'll just invert that layer mask with Command. So now this logo is being hidden wherever the band members are, and we can drag it wherever we want, and the band members are still in front. Let's make this a bit prettier. We're going to do some layer styles on this logo. So I'm going to open up the layer styles panel here, and the first thing I want to add is a gradient overlay. So we'll turn that on, and of course we could play with this to our liking. I really like that kind of Xeroxy grainy fade that we get from using a gradient on here. And the cool thing about a gradient overlay is you can drag it wherever you want on the layer. So if I just click and drag, I could drag it down to the middle, to the bottom, wherever I want. Now unfortunately we just lost half of our logo, so what we're going to do is add an inner shadow to fix that. So we'll turn on the inner shadow here, and we're going to make the color white, and then we're just going to bring up the size a little bit, and we're also going to bring up the choke as well, and this gives us sort of an inner stroke on our logo. And now it's playing with that gradient overlay, and it's looking really nice. So the layer style is already looking amazing because of all the processing we're doing on it with that Xerox grain look. But one thing I want to add for later, which you're not going to be able to see now, but it's a drop shadow, and we're just going to turn that to black and crank up the size and distance because we're going to add something behind the band just a little bit later. So we'll press OK on this, and right now I want to start on the coloring process. Coloring within VINTONE is super easy and intuitive. Just like how everything you throw in the composite group is going to be automatically half-toned or Xerox grained or whatever you choose, so are the colors that you paint in. So we're going to open up this colors group here, and just to do a quick demonstration for you, I'm going to paint in the paint and mask part of this color. I'm using a soft brush here. It's just a normal soft brush, but as you can see, when I start painting it in, it's automatically dithered using the dither pattern that we chose. So I chose Xerox grain, so that's what we're getting on this brush stroke here. So that means everything in this design is going to be completely dithered down to the pixel, and that makes it absolutely perfect for screen printing. Anyway, let's start actually coloring this. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up the color group here, the first color group, and I'm just going to invert this mask. And if you don't know already, anything you paint white in this mask or even in a different layer above this mask is going to color in the photo or the composite with the color that you choose, and you choose the color using the color overlay in the respective color groups. So if I open up the layer styles of this color group, this color overlay is going to control the color of wherever you paint inside the mask with white in this group. So pretty simple stuff. Whatever is white in this mask is going to turn the graphic that color. However, before I start painting anything, the first thing I like to do is add a neutral base color to the whole graphic. That way when we paint in the colors later on, like the skin, etc., we can see what we're doing more easily because we're painting on a neutral background instead of this really bright white. So I'm actually going to turn this entire layer mask white, by filling it with white with Command Backspace on my keyboard, or you can also do Command I to invert the layer mask and turn it all white, and that is going to fill our graphic with the color in the color overlay for this group. So I'm just going to go in the layer styles of this group and turn that to more of a neutral gray, and now our entire graphic is filled with this more neutral gray, and we can see, and we'll be able to see what we're doing a lot better. So I'll press OK on these, and now it's time to actually start coloring the objects and elements in our graphic. I also highly recommend you name these groups to whatever the color is or whatever is applicable to the group. So I'm just going to name this base, so I know it's my base color layer. And up here I'm going to name this skin, because this is what I'm going to use to paint in the skin of our band members. So once I open up these groups, we have the same exact format here. Whatever we paint in this layer mask is going to turn the graphic that color. This is an absolutely horrid skin tone, so I'm going to go ahead and change the color before I do anything else. I'll open up the layer styles of this skin group, and I'll just mess with the color overlay until I find a color that I like. I really like using a bright or sort of an off-white for the skin tone for these vintage graphics. You see that get used a lot in vintage graphics, even in the references that I showed you earlier. And actually, before I start painting this in, I want to make sure that I'm coloring it within the lines of the image. So what I'm going to do is put this paint and mask layer in a group by doing Command G on my keyboard, and I go all the way back down to our composite, and I'll grab a selection of our band members here, just like we did for the logo, and I'll go all the way back up here, and I'll make a layer mask on this group out of that selection. So now wherever we paint in this paint and mask layer is going to only be within the bounds of the selection of the band. Cool, so now I can start painting in my skin tone wherever I want. I'm gonna start painting that in on their faces and their hands and whatnot. Okay, cool. This graphic is already starting to come together. Now I want to start painting in the colors of other things, like their jackets, their guitars, their pants, and so on. So rather than repeating the process of grabbing the selection and making the group and doing whatever I needed to do to paint within the lines of the band on this color group, all I'll do is just duplicate the skin color group, and then I'll just empty the layer mask, and then I'll just name this whatever I want to paint in now. So I'm going to work on the hair, and then I'll just empty the layer mask of this group. So I'll fill this all in with black using Command Delete on my keyboard. So before I start any painting, I'm going to change the color of this to whatever I want the color of the hair to be. Honestly, I think most of these guys are sort of blondish, so I'm just going to use like sort of a little more saturated yellow tone. Cool, so now I'm just going to start painting in on their hair, and as you can see, all of the colors in VINTONE are stackable. So I'm painting over these skin tones here because this color group is placed above the skin color group, but I can always switch them if I want the skin above the hair or so on. A little trick I like to do for hair is when I'm not really sure where the hairline is, or if the hair is kind of frizzy in some areas and I don't know where to paint it in, I like to just change the opacity of my brush to something way lower, like 20 or 30, and then just start painting in sort of a thin veneer of hair. That way you're not making like a definitive decision on where the hair is, you're kind of just getting the color in that general area. Now that I've got their hair and skin all complete, I'm going to start working on their suits and guitars, and we're going to repeat the process of just duplicating this group and then changing it to whatever we're going to paint in now. So I'm going to work on the suits first. I'll change the color of this to a reddish pinkish tone because it is Aerosmith after all. I'll press OK on this and then empty the layer mask that we have on here so it's not overriding the hair that we just painted in. So I'll do Command Backspace to fill that with black, and now I can start painting in the color for the suits wherever their suits are. Okay, check this out. I painted in all the color for these suits, but I accidentally painted over the skin on Steven Tyler's hand here. But like I said earlier, these colors are stackable. So if I wanted to bring the skin on top of the suits color, all I have to do is drag this skin color above the suits group, and now that skin is overpowering the suits color. Now I want to do some deviation within their outfits because I don't think they're all matching. I don't want them to be all matching. So maybe I'll make one of their shirts red or white or something like that. And I'll do that by just duplicating the suits group and changing the color to whatever new color I want to use. I'll use more of a potent red this time. I'm going to name this suits 2, and now I can go into this group, empty the layer mask with Command Backspace, and then start painting in that new color and wherever I want on these suits. Actually, while I'm painting in the alternate color for these suits, I also want to add some detail on the guitars here. Assuming a design like this will be screen printed, we want to save on colors wherever we can. So I'm just going to reuse the same red that we're using for the suit here to add some details onto the guitars. So I'll start painting in this red onto the body of this guitar here. Maybe I'll add it up here as well. I'll do that on this guitar as well. And while we're doing the whole saving colors thing, I might as well make the whole rest of the band image this white color just to fill all the rest of it in with something besides this gray. So I'm going to make another duplicate of any of these groups here. I'm just going to make it on the suits group down here. And once I duplicate that, I'm actually going to take the bottom group and name that fill. I'm going to go into the layer mask of the painted mask here of this group, and I'll just change it all to white. And then I'll do Alt Delete on my keyboard to fill this entire layer mask with white. And that's going to fill in the whole rest of this band graphic with whatever color we have in the color overlay for this group here. Now I don't want that to be the pink that we use for the suits. I want it to be the off-white that we use for the skin tones. So I'm just going to find the skin tones group layer here, and I'll hold down Alt and drag this FX icon onto the fill group right here. And that's going to copy that layer effects or that color overlay to this group, and now we have that same white color filling in the rest of this band graphic. Before we do anything else, I'm actually going to go in and change the color of these suits, the reds and pinks, to something a little bit more flattering. Okay, that's cool. I like these colors better. So we've completely colored in the graphic of the band here, and now we can move on to coloring the logo. So now we can open up any of these three color groups here. I'm just going to go with the first one I see, this color 03 down here. And again, whatever we paint in this mask is going to add that color onto our graphic. Now, unfortunately, if we start painting in this logo, we can see that we're also overlapping with the band here, and we're kind of painting over those colors that we just painted in. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make a group on this layer by doing Command G on my keyboard. I'm going to go all the way down to get a selection of our band members. So I'll just grab the selection from this layer mask over here, and I'll make a layer mask on this group using the layer mask icon. And now all the band members are filled with black in this layer mask. So whatever we paint in this layer is going to exclude itself from the selection of the band members here. However, in case we add anything else to the composite, I also want anything we paint in this mask to be restricted to only the Aerosmith logo. So I'll select this group and make another group with Command G, and I'll go all the way down to our Aerosmith logo. I'll grab a selection of that, and I'll go up here and make a layer mask using the layer mask icon. And now anything we paint in this layer mask down here will be not only restricted to the logo, but also will exclude itself from the image of the band members. So I'll just paint all over the logo here to fill it all in with the color that we're going to choose. And I'll go into the color overlay or the layer styles of this group to change the color overlay. And I'll just change this color to the red that we used earlier for the guitar and these suits. And now this is really starting to come together. The only thing I can think of adding now is some more texture. So if you remember correctly, we actually added a drop shadow onto the Aerosmith logo from earlier. And that's because I plan to throw some sort of element or texture behind the graphic of the band and the logo, but I don't want it to interact too much with the logo or the band, so we have a drop shadow on the logo, and we could even add one to the band as well. But let's throw in some textures here first to see what we're working with. So I actually just dropped this set of ink roll textures on my web store. It's got over 50 textures of ink that I've rolled over onto different types of paper with different types of rollers to get an interesting grungy effect. Here's a few of my favorites, and we're actually going to be using some of these to form the background for our design. So I'll close all these out, and I want to drag in a specific one here that I really like. It is the 31st texture, so I'm going to drag that into our composition here, and now I just want to scale this to size and fit it with the actual design. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees so that it actually fills out the composition here. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger as well. Right now the ink rolls are black on white, but I actually want them to be white on black. So I'm just going to invert this with Command I, and now I'm going to start placing this somewhere I think it fits. I'm going to start layer masking in different parts of the texture to get it looking just how I want. The drop shadow that we added to the logo was clearly not enough. We're going to have to strengthen the drop shadow on the logo so that it blocks out part of this texture here, because right now it's a bit distracting from the actual logo and graphic itself. So let's go into the layer styles of this logo and just crank up the size on this drop shadow. We'll crank up the spread as well. Cool, that's looking a bit better. I also want to add a drop shadow to our band here. So what I'll do is grab a selection of the band from the photo here. So what I'll do is find the original layer with our band members and drag that all the way up on top of the logo and everything else. I'll set the fill of this layer to 0, and then I'll go into the layer styles and just add a drop shadow. That's looking good. It's a bit too heavy for my taste. So I'm going to turn the size all the way down and the spread up a bit as well. And this gets us more of an outline effect, which I think is pretty cool. Alright, so now I'm just going to layer mask parts of these textures out because it's a bit too heavy right now. So I'm going to make a layer mask on this texture layer. I'll grab a soft brush, and I'll just start painting in with black wherever I want the texture not to be. If you recall correctly, we still have this base color group going on up here. So that's coloring in everything that we didn't color ourselves with this 50% gray or this neutral gray. Now that I've pretty much colored in everything I want to, we can change this color to whatever we want so that it only affects the thing that we didn't color in, which is this grunge background here. So I'm going to go into the layer styles of this layer, and I want to change this color overlay to a nice blue, and that adds some nice little color contrast between the red and the blue in the foreground and the background. Now to finish this off, I'm going to throw a little bit more texture on here. I'm going to be using the textures that are included in the VINTONE kit, which are the samples of my warm plastisol textures. So immediately when I turn this textures group back on, we already have those textures affecting our design. And we can choose from any 3 of these sample plastisol textures, or of course if you have my full warm plastisol pack, which you can grab on my website, you'll be able to choose from any of these super high res and authentic warm plastisol textures. For now, I'm just going to stick to the sample ones that we have in this VINTONE textures group. I really like warm plastisol sample 03. So that's what I'm going to be using for this design. Alright, and that's about it for this graphic. Now all that's left to do is prepare the final file and mock it up. What I usually like to do is close the entire VINTONE group and then do Command, Option, Shift E on my keyboard. And that'll make a merge duplicate of everything in your canvas. And then I'll turn off the VINTONE group layer here. And since everything is dithered down to the pixel, all you have to do to remove the black background is take your magic wand, make sure anti-alias is unchecked, select the black background, and press delete. Now if you want to color separate this, all you have to do is zoom in a little bit and start selecting each color that you use in your design and putting it on its own separate layer. So I'll select the red here, and I'll do layer via cut by right clicking and choosing layer via cut. And now that red is on its own separate layer. And we just rinse and repeat that process for every other color in the graphic. Now I'm not sending this to print, I just want to mock this up. But if you are sending this to print, then obviously finish off that color separation. Once you've got all your colors separated onto their own layers, just make sure they're all aligned. Select all your color separation layers and convert it to a smart object. And then you can open up that smart object and save this as a PSD and send that off to your printer. They'll have the entire color separation for that graphic in layers in the Photoshop document. I just want to mock this up really quickly to show you guys our final result. It's pretty damn cool. Dream on! This is our final result using VINTONE, my new ink roll textures that just dropped on my website, and my warm plastisol texture kit, some of which are included in VINTONE. So if you haven't got the memo by now, go pick up VINTONE and go pick up my new textures on my website. I promise you won't regret it, and I wouldn't sell you something that I wouldn't use myself to use on merch for some of the biggest names in the music industry. I really hope you learned something in this video. If you did, give it a like. If you like me, subscribe to the channel. I post videos like this every week to help you become a better designer. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace out.